Welcome, everyone. My name is Becky Rares, and I'll be moderating this session, Sakai, Atlas, and NGDLE. Before we begin, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping details. The session is being recorded, and you'll receive an email announcement once the recordings are available. If you have questions or comments, please type them into the chat area on the lower right. Or if you have a microphone, feel free to ask questions or make comments. However, please do mute yourself if you're not speaking to avoid extra background noise. So here's the presenters. The presenters for this session are Dr. Cheryl Brown and Salwa Khan. Cheryl Brown is a senior lecturer at the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at the University of Cape Town and co-convener of their postgrad EdTech programs. Salwa Khan is an instructor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Texas State University. Please welcome Salwa and Cheryl.
Thank you, Becky. This is Salwa Khan. To introduce myself, I'm the past chair of the Teaching with Sakai Awards Committee, and Cheryl and Louisa Lee, who isn't here for this presentation, but who worked with us on this project, are the current chairs. The award, which is now named Atlas, recognizes innovative teaching within the community of schools that use the Sakai learning management system, as well as other teaching tools from the Apereo Foundation. So you probably heard about how learning is increasingly social, dispersed, and learner-centered. As a result, questions have been raised about the traditional learning management system, questions such as what its role should be, what it might look like in the near future, and even whether it will be necessary at all. So as teaching and learning practitioners, Cheryl, Louisa, and I were curious about how the winners of the past Teaching with Sakai Innovation Award, and now the Atlas Awards, have managed to be innovative within the Sakai LMS. We were curious about what lessons we can learn from their innovation that could guide the development of the next generation digital learning environment, which you've probably heard a lot about, the NGDLE. So here in this picture, you'll see some of the 35 winners over the years of the TWISIA, the Teaching with Sakai Innovation Award, awards. So for the past 9 years, this community, which is now Apereo, and before that was the Sakai community, has been recognizing innovation through these awards. TWISIA, which was renamed Atlas, the Apereo Teaching and Learning Awards in 2015. And this was done so that we could encompass not just the Sakai LMS, but other teaching software that lives under the Apereo Foundation umbrella. Two of the new tools, the newest tools, are OpenCast and Xerte. And in fact, last year we had an award winner from the Xerte community. The Karuta portfolio system and OAE have been part of this process for years. So in this presentation, we're going to share our analysis of the past 4 years of award winners in terms of innovation to see whether and how the Sakai LMS offers a framework for innovative teaching, such as that envisioned in the NGDLE, the Next Generation Digital Learning Environment. Now, if you were to apply for the award, you would see our definition of innovation. Innovation as a method, practice, or strategy that by design and execution engages, challenges students, resulting in greater student interest, a deeper level of understanding, and/or a lasting change in the student's perception of an issue or a topic. So in other words, we're looking for educators who engage students, who truly make a lasting and positive impact on student learning. And you probably heard the traditional learning management system described as being static, limited, and inflexible. At the same time, the teaching and learning community is talking about the next generation digital learning strategies, which include student-centric teaching, personalizing learning through the use of analytics, and authentic learning experiences where students face real-world challenges. Basically, as it always has been, the goal is to engage students in learning. So this is why we decided to take a look at our existing LMS, Sakai, and the Innovation Awards. Our goal was to see how educators who have won the award have, using our definition of innovation, engaged students in authentic learning experiences, and to see how they did that using what is described as the static, limited, and inflexible LMS. So we're going to look at a little research here. According to a recent report by ECAR, the EDUCAUSE Center for Research and Analysis, 99% of institutions are using an LMS, and both faculty and students value it as an enhancement to their teaching and learning. So 85% of faculty and 83% of students are using the LMS in most or all of their courses. Now, this is something you probably experienced at your own institution, but most faculty are using just basic tools. They're not using advanced features. And even fewer use these systems to the full capacity. So most faculty are using the LMS to share course materials, content, rather than to interact with and engage with students. This study also found that user satisfaction is highest for basic LMS features and lowest for features designed to foster collaboration and engagement. Continuing with this EDUCAUSE report, student and faculty want the LMS to be personalized, and they want the use of analytics to enhance learning outcomes. Mobile-friendly access is very important, of course. And the ECAR report says issues of communication, meaningful interactions, collaboration, and engagement are areas in which faculty and students think the LMS could be improved. So the very areas that are targeted by our definition of innovation for the awards that center around student engagement are those that the faculty and students in this survey target as important and as needing improvement. The EDUCAUSE report sees the next generation digital learning environment not as a single monolithic LMS, but rather as a series of applications or components that can be customized by connecting them together and using different sets of learning tool standards. The idea is to separate the course administrative tools and functions like class lists and gradebooks from the teaching and learning tools and allow faculty to mix and match tools to fit their needs. There's also an element of personalization in this approach, but NGDLE is more institutional and faculty focused than individual. So basically the idea is that it's going to be a modular system and which allows institutions to pick and choose the most relevant tools to suit the specific needs of their students and their faculty populations. So I'm going to tell you a little about our analytical process in this for this presentation. What we did was we looked at 18 winning entries of the Teaching with Sakai Award over the past 5 years, from 2012 to 2016. We focused on courses and not portfolios or project sites. And we looked at what made their teaching and learning practice innovative. We did a collaborative analysis by the three of us, and we reviewed the past applications and analyzed them using a Google Sheet so that we could collaborate. And then let me talk a little about the award rubric that we use when we assess innovation. So this is the rubric that the TWSIA and now the ATLAS committee uses in order to evaluate our entries. So the award rubric defines 5 criteria student engagement and community building, communication, learning materials and strategies, learning outcomes and assessment, and learner support. And so from here, Cheryl is going to take over and take you through the rest of our presentation. Cheryl?
Thanks, Selma. Thanks for making me presenter. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk through our particular categories and what we see or notice that was innovative in the applications that we looked at. So I'm just going to give you some examples and just unpack each of these as we go along. And then we're going to end up by concluding and having a look at what we think this says both about the LMS and the next generation digital learning environment. So the first one of our categories is the one that Selma's talked about quite a lot, which is about student engagement and community building. So if you go and have a look at our Atlas Awards on the Apereo website, you'll see that there'll be a link to quite a detailed rubric. I mean, I suppose we are a teaching and learning community, so rubrics are something that speaks sort of easily to us. But some of the things that really come out for us as standing out in the winning applications are things like how people go about building a community, how they create that social rapport between students. It's about how people use the LMS and the tools to support collaborative learning, how they enable students to bring their own interests and discoveries into the course. So it's about not just teacher-dominated and teacher-controlled practices, but it's about how we can help students actually bring interests and contribute to the community, and how we can help them assist and work with each other, which I think is something that we often desire to do in good teaching and learning practice, but is really quite hard to achieve. So here I'm just going to give you an example of one award-winning entry and how they ended up doing it in their particular site. So this is one from a 2014 winner, Shannon Hahn, on reading and composition. So I think what's interesting is you can see how sometimes quite basic LMS tools, in this case, this preceded their adoption of lessons. And so here they were using a wiki to allow students to start to create and contribute links and resources that they were finding helpful in their language learning. So there were groups, and each group was sort of assigned a topic, and students were able to contribute information to their group page and discuss it and question each other. So the idea was to allow students to contribute content and everyone else to interrogate the value of that content. So I think it's really useful to see how simple tools can enable student contributions to learning. And in this case, it wasn't a problem to get students to contribute. If you give them a space, they're waiting for an opportunity to put their ideas and share their voices. So the next quite obvious sort of criteria we have is about communication. And I mean, that's also relates to engagement. It's the thing we really want to. We want to be able to communicate with our students and them with us. And so what we think makes good evidence of communication is to give people, students and lecturers multiple options for sharing and communicating, not just written, but voice, visual communications, options that students can control where they can present and lead and share communications. And that communications, which are sometimes quite tricky online, can be quite clearly articulated. And so it's really important, we think, that things like ground rules, the way you're meant to engage, and the structure of the engagement is there for students as well. And also that the instructor is able to provide quite rapid feedback, because when you are in an online space, the sense of isolation can often be quite hard, whether it's completely online or whether it's blended. So the example that I picked here is one from a 2015 winner, Lucy Talents, who won for her course in conservation statistics. So here we see an online course that's actually connecting students who live in very remote areas with very poor internet connections. So here's some really strategic choices were made about how much synchronous and how much asynchronous interaction to have with the students. So they deliberately avoided real-time video and audio because streaming was a particular problem in this context. But they used the forum and other wiki tools and things to allow students to introduce themselves, share their experiences, form a sense of community, reassure each other when they had senses of anxiety, and gave a lot of different ways for communicating. So they did provide material in many alternate formats. They had HTML, PDFs. They did have some video, but students could download those. There were sort of quick minute papers that they used in lessons for quick questions and answers. Tutors were assigned to different groups to give feedback, so there was always some space for interaction and for sort of sounding out ideas and getting input on things. So they used a range of tools, and it wasn't necessarily compulsory to use everything, but it gave students choices as to how to interact depending on what their context was, and enabled the creating of a sense of community both between students, between each other, and between the tutors and lecturer and students. Okay, so the other thing that's obviously quite important in an LMS and in the whole teaching and learning environment is the materials we provide for students and the strategies we use to help them engage with these materials. And often this is the thing that the LMS is used most dominantly for. I mean, I think in our opening plenary, people were saying, yes, professors will just put up stuff in the resources section. And that, you're right, that is one of the most dominant practices. I mean, people do that. But when we're looking for signs of innovation, we're looking for how the learning environment is helping students work through the resources, how they can explore and draw on a range of resources, how the content can be provided and addressed in many different ways. You know, they look for good navigation, activities that allow learners to input, to comment, to feedback, so not just one directional communication of resources. So the example here is from a course that won last year, and in fact, I think I forgot the title or the name of the course. So this was from an introductory statistics course that won. And here you can see they're using the lessons tool very much to allow videos, PDF explanations of content, Excel worksheets so students can work through a particular problems, so students can read, they can watch, then linking it in with forums for them to ask questions of tutors and chat rooms. So they're allowing the materials to be shared in many different ways, and then for the discussion to be facilitated and engaged with at many levels by different people. So the lecturers would take responsibility for the Q&A and for providing this sort of a single answer to a question. The forums the tutors managed, and the chat room was for the students and the peers to interact with each other. So here was a very good example of how both the resources and the communications were quite well interlined in terms of the pedagogical approach. And in fact, I've got another example here from one of our double winners. I suppose what it shows is, and we decided as a committee, that innovators clearly innovate all the time. It's not something you do once off. And as a result of last year's winners winning 2 years in a row, we've now created a rule that says you can't win 2 years in a row. You've got to at least give it a gap in between. Otherwise, we think these two very creative educators would be winning all the time. But what they do is they have they've sort of adopted a kind of a gamified approach, which they're using in their courses. And they're using the LMS as the home, and they're allowing students to create and contribute to the resources by moving in and out of the LMS. So they have content they put up, and they have their PowerPoints. So they use some very traditional teaching strategies. But then what they do is they have this lovely idea of a side quest where they get students to actually go and pick a topic from their textbook and go into a public space and try and get input and feedback on the topic. So in this case, they're doing a psychology course. So they pick topics like unconditional stimulus or unconditioned responses. So they're the sort of things that a person can try and test in a public space, and they do it as groups, and somebody videos somebody else, and they have to then gather a video information, upload it onto YouTube, and others can watch it and comment and discuss how this theoretical concept, which they read about in a textbook, how they can actually see it happening or experience it happening in real life. So it's creating an authentic experience for them in terms of how to take textbook knowledge and actually see how it plays out. And they offer very small amounts of marks for it, but it's really about the experience, and they offer badges and rewards for the students for having achieved this. It turns out I think students and adults alike are often quite happily rewarded just by getting a nice little badge or tick box to say, oh, well done, you did that well. And then the last criteria is about the learning outcomes and assessment. And what we look for here in terms of innovative practice is a range of assessment strategies that are clearly defined and obviously aligned to the learning objectives of the course, but also ones that are not just about reproducing knowledge, but ones that are about self-reflection, helping encouraging students to critically think and problem solve, giving them opportunities for feedback, so it's not just a sort of a summative assessment without the opportunity to learn and develop as they're going along. And one of the really nice examples that we have here is, in fact, that's what I've done with my titles. I will, before we finalize these PowerPoints, I'll make this the change because I've got the wrong title on it. This one comes from Population Health. I've got the statistics title on the bottom. So here they actually created an authentic experience of a potentially realistic but clearly fictitious scenario of a zombie apocalypse. You know, quite nice current genre for students. And these were nursing students, health students in the military, and they used this idea of this fictitious zombie apocalypse to try and get these students actually working in groups to develop real life plans, both health plans, military responses, models for dealing with this. So they worked with scenarios to try and develop an authentic assessment around the response to this problem, which despite its fictitious nature, really was about a sort of a real global health, potential health risk. So it was really a very useful way of making the assessment authentic and structuring it in a sort of an innovative and different way. And our last, actually, that was our second last criteria. The last criteria is about the learner support. So especially in the online environment, it's really important that students are orientated to online learning. That accessibility is something that's clearly thought about, that we're helping students develop the digital skills we're going to require of them. So in the case of the sort of psychology course, you can't just send students out to create videos if they haven't got the skills and ability to do that. So I haven't got many more to go. I'm just looking at our time. So this was an example of how students can be provided with support both online in terms of video, in terms of scaffolding, accessibility, orientation guides, websites, and also what's valuable to us is that there is something there for them to fall back on. And often this is easier for courses where there are support teams in place and it's not just the lecturer, but if it's thought about up front, it can often really, really help. Okay, so in terms of our findings, what we've seen, and I've given you a couple of examples just to illustrate how we think about innovation in terms of what we're seeing, both in the LMS and Sakai and in the broader Apereo tool suite, is that we see that the learning that innovative teachers use is very active. It's very authentic. It's really about translating the theory into practice, that the tools they use are often terribly basic and simple. I mean, I don't think we've seen any examples there of anything that's terribly whiz-bang. They're basic tool sets, and yet they can have a really powerful impact. And that really what we see is that the limit is only in terms of the creativity and imagination on the educator's behalf. I mean, every time we review these awards, we're astounded by how creatively educators are thinking about the same problems that we're faced with. But one of the other things that we see is, despite the fact that I've shown a lot of examples of how Sakai tools are used, we see that what Sakai enables is that it enables the educator to step out of the learning management system and draw in other tools from all over. And these are some of the other tools that were drawn into the innovative courses. So this wasn't only about the LMS. The LMS was the home. I think we've called it the house, the hub, but the space where we start from. And from that, we can go out to all sorts of things and come back to what's familiar. This is just a Wordle that we did around the common learning activities that were there. And if we go back to thinking of reflecting about what we said about the new generation digital learning environment, it was about personalization and collaboration. And we see that being present even in the innovations we've seen with the current products that we have. So our conclusion is that the LMS does have flexibility. It's flexible enough to enable engagement across time and space. It allows us to bring in what we need from external tools. It doesn't have to be a single packaged one-size-fits-all. And we can do really creative things with simple use of technology. And some of these examples even predate Lessons Tool, which has been a lot easier to do things with. And that what we shouldn't think about is we shouldn't think about our learning environment and innovation as having to control it all. So this was another winning entry where Sakai and OAE were the basis for the learning that happened. But at the end of the project, the educator said, what other tools have you been using during this course? And this is the range of tools that students step out into in their personal and informal learning spaces when they're not in the class. And we think that's also really powerful because we can't control all the learning that happens, and I don't think we should. And it's lovely to be able to have the space, the formal virtual space, where we can enable this type of learning to bounce off. So I think, and I know we're getting close to out of time, I'm just going to jump over to our conclusions. So if we go back to thinking about what the NGDLE features are about, our conclusion is that what we have in an LMS and what we have in Sakai can actually meet all of those features and requirements that places like EDUCAUSE are sort of saying the next generation system needs to be looking at. We believe you can think about the way you LTI link and integrate tools in Sakai as component-based. We can see examples of customization and adaptability. We can see personalization. I'm not sure about this thing about wanting to separate out admin and pedagogy, because I think as long as pedagogy drives the technology, what we're going to end up with is good pedagogical practice. So our conclusion in the end is that really what you need to do is you just need to make Sakai your own. You don't need to go and move off to another house to get what you want. And you need to use the examples that we hear about in conferences like this as stimulation for what it is that you can do and how you can make it creative. And that's what we've seen in all these examples that we've been reviewing. So thank you. Not much time for questions, I'm sorry. Or do we have 10 minutes? I can't remember. Oh, super. Thanks, Becky. Well, to our colleagues that are there, I'm sure that I'm just trying to see, we have other members of our Atlas committee in the room with us. I mean, we've got Jolie, who's part of our committee. So if you've got any questions for us, please do fire away. But really, I think we feel this presentation is a little bit like representing all the wonderful things everyone else is doing. This is not what we're doing. This is just what we're seeing in other people's fabulous practices. Selma, do you want to add any reflections after your sort of many years of experience in our awards committee?
Well, I think the thing I'm curious about is what others think about our conclusion, that the LMS, although it may be static and described in ways that sound really unpleasant, can actually be the hub of creativity and good teaching, good pedagogy. I wondered if anybody else had any experiences that speak to that?
And while you're all just thinking about that, I see Pat's asked a question about the role of Facebook. I think that was really interesting. I mean, what we found, I think, and I'm just trying to remember some of the examples of it, is there needed to sometimes just be some informal sort of let off steam types of spaces. And I think in a lot of cases, Facebook was often student driven. Sometimes it linked out from the LMS, sometimes it just ran parallel to it as another space in which there was some engagement. And I don't think that in any of the examples I can remember that it was highly sort of instructor or lecturer led. But what was quite interesting is that it wasn't sort of hidden from the lecturer. And often it was about the effective side of learning, so not necessarily the cognitive side. I mean, if there was space in the LMS for students to share examples and links and readings, you know, things that they'd found. They didn't necessarily do that in Facebook, but they'd share, it could be more of a sense of community building. And also they would let off steam in the sense of, you know, oh, assignment's due, you know, I'm really stressed about this, how are you finding it? I think the other thing in our South African context we're finding, and Regina mentioned it earlier, was the use of WhatsApp as an instant messaging tool. And I think to some extent that also exists parallel to the LMS, and the students use it in very similar ways for the sort of a mixture of community building, informal learning, and effective learning. But I'm very interested in Selwa's question that everybody's been very quiet.
Tony is asking a question about adaptive learning. Can you tell me what that encompasses? Yeah, I'm not quite sure what adaptive learning speaks to. Something I haven't, I guess, heard a lot about. Does anyone want to explain what that is?
Hi, this is Jolie. I agree with Regina's comment about lessons on a very basic level being adaptive. And at Duke, we've looked at adaptive learning platforms and in ways that we see it being used as sort of supplemental to the LMS. It's a different thing and probably would be used in a different way by our instructors, by faculty at Duke. So we don't really see that as a replacement for an LMS or even necessarily something that has to be inside the LMS. So it could be, but I don't think it has to be. And I think that when we start talking about the LMS shrinking and becoming smaller and having fewer tools and being more of a framework of kind of a core, then that sort of kind of is moving away from that idea anyway of bringing more functionality into the LMS.
I think adaptive learning is going to be something really interesting to look out for, because I don't think we haven't seen many examples of it in our innovation awards. And I mean, I think doing it well really takes some good thinking pedagogically. And I don't know whether it's the tools that are limiting us or whether it's the thinking that's limiting us.
Right, and actually, as Pat noted, Xerte is one of the tools that is now part of the awards process, and they do have some branching available there. So that may be one of the tools that which can be incorporated into your Sakai that would do that kind of thing.
Yeah, Xerte is really worth looking at, Tony. I mean, we're still playing with it in our context, but we've been having quite a lot of fun, and I think there's it's really nice. I can't imagine using it on its own, but I think working together with Sakai, it's really powerful. I missed the birds of a feather that was earlier on, where they were looking at learning pathways in lessons. Lucy Talents was doing that. It was a sort of learning pathway in lessons, birds of a feather discussion. So I think there's definitely potential there that we haven't quite thought about. And it'd be really interesting to see somebody giving it a go and then sharing it back with the community about how they might have done it. I think if any of you come up with a good way of doing it that at least uses some Apereo of the Apereo tool suite, you could absolutely apply for an Atlas Award for next year, because we're clearly saying we don't have enough examples of innovation and adaptive learning. So there's something everybody can start to work on now. And I suppose just a ending point, actually, we have our slides and we don't actually have a link to our Atlas website at all, which is really appalling. So let me just put a link up so you can go and have a look at it. And if you're interested in looking at the awards and applying, I'm going to put the call out, I think, early December, and it would run through to, oh, let me just paste it in there. I don't know what our closing date is, but it's usually sort of early part of the following year. So that's for more information about Atlas Awards, because we think that's great. It's a fabulous way of recognizing the teaching and learning innovation that we see in Sakai and Apereo products. I think we're having some very interesting discussion there. Two-minute warning. Okay, well, I think the discussion is as interesting as anything that we've got to say. So any last comments to the people that have joined us? Or from the people that have joined us? Well, thank you for listening to us, guys. And I think some of your comments and discussions have been are really useful. I mean, I think it would be really nice for us to think about that. And we're busy revisiting and thinking about the Atlas process and our rubrics for next year. So I really do think this discussion around the differences, the nuances of these and the differences between them, and will be will be able to sort of feed into some of our discussion.
Yeah.
Jolie in particular, hey, because you're busy working on the rubrics.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I'd also like to echo Cheryl's suggestion that you enter the Atlas Awards. That should be coming up soon, and we'll be sending an email to everyone. So please talk to your faculty, talk to your instructional designers, and get ready.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I'm turning off the recording.
Thanks.